Cognitive development is this chapter's, this week's topic. Developmental psychologists often divide our development into three areas: physical, cognitive, or mental, and psychosocial. We're going to talk about the cognitive mostly, and a little bit about the psychosocial in this lecture. I created this subheading, from womb to tomb. I think that's a clever rhyming way to describe the entire lifespan development. This is more of an overview. It's not going to get into great detail about any particular age group, but I just wanted to give an overview. Nature and nurture as a theme. John Locke proposed tabula rasa, which means blank slate, to advocate his view that nurture is the dominant or maybe the only force that makes us who we are. That we have no built-in knowledge when we're born, but that we acquire all of our knowledge through nurture. Nurture is another word for environment. It's everything that we take in, that we learn. It's everything that we learn from our environment, from nature. Well, that's confusing because the next one is nature. Nature versus nurture. Nature means genes. Charles Darwin advocated his theory of evolution to explain why we are the way we are, why we know what we know, and can do what we can do. The abilities are biologically based. So he called that, well, we call that today, we call that nature. So nature is the genes and nurture is the environment. Like our parents form the important environment for us as we are babies. The conclusion of this debate, because I'm just going to cut to the chase and not have us debate it, it's no longer worth debating because we have already pretty well exhausted the debate and concluded that nature and nurture both interact continuously to guide our development. We are born with specific genetic abilities, and these are like eye color, height, certain personality traits. Our experiences influence whether or how these traits are expressed, and our genes influence how we interact with our environment. So the two interact with each other continuously, kind of like the game of ping pong. It takes two to play the game. So nature hits the ball over into nurture's court. Nurture hits it back against nature. And they are continually interacting to support our development. Development can be illustrated with either of these two trajectories. We could call our development a continuous progression, or we could say that it is discontinuous and that it occurs in stages. Which one is right? Which one is wrong? Well, this was also a debate that was kind of stimulating the developmental psychology literature for a while, and still is. But there's no right answer. What's your take on this? Do you think that development is better described with the left or the right figure?
The left.
The left one.
Right.
Left.
So it looks like we're getting more lefts And you can type in the chat box here. I have one answer. Left. Both, someone says. That's true. They are both illustrations. My own take is that development is surely continuous, like the left-hand figure, but for purposes of describing and conceptualizing development, at any given point, it is extremely useful to reference developmental stages, just as it is useful to describe a spot on a color spectrum as though it were one of the colors that we know in our language. So just like this discontinuous development with the steps is in different colors, so if this were a smooth transition between those steps, a smooth color gradient, we might pick any point on the gradient and say that color is orange or that color is maroon, which is taking a kind of stage theory for the purposes of description. So it's not that the stage theory is absolutely correct, but it is useful for description purposes. Some theories assert that there are stages. For example, Freud's psychosexual stages of development theory says that each stage must be passed through to get to the next stage, and that the success or failure to overcome the previous stage or the challenges in the previous stage affect later personality in adulthood and the traits and the psychopathologies. So the stage theory is useful for description and for theoretical explanation. So we may come to the stages theory repeatedly throughout psychology. That doesn't mean that the continuous development model is wrong. It just means that the discontinuous model is useful. And here are the stages that we can talk about, that developmental psychologists often refer to. There's prenatal, that means before you're born. Then there's infancy, which lasts to about 2 years. Then there's child development, which goes up to about adolescence or 12 years old. Adolescence is about 12 or 13 up until adulthood, which is usually defined at around 20 years of age. I think that's also the age that Thailand considers a person to be an adult. Correct me if I'm wrong. When are you an adult? Is it 20?
It's 20.
I think so. I think it's 20.
Yeah. Well, that is an agreement. That agrees with developmental psychologists in general, that generally point to 20 as the start of adulthood, whereas 18 and 19 are technically adults in America, but they are still considered adolescent from the viewpoint of a lot of developmental psychologists. So Thailand is an agreement. The prenatal stage of development is illustrated here. This is physical development from 9 weeks of age. These are not actual sizes, but they illustrate that the fetus grows bigger and bigger. You can see that sex organs differentiate, fingers and toes develop, hearing begins, lungs develop. Long before you need lungs, they're developing. Brain grows and develops, and so on. And then A child is born. Newborns show preference for their mother's voice, even as soon as they are born. Why do you suppose that is?
Is it because when the babies are in the stomach, they can hear the mother's voice?
Precisely. Whereas they cannot hear their father's voice so well because of the barrier, the skin, fat, blood, placenta, all of that blocks the child's hearing of outside stuff for the most part, but the voice of the mother conducts through her own body, through the blood and everything, through the bones. So the baby is very familiar with the mother's voice. You may have heard that babies that are exposed to classical music when they're still in the womb will have a preference for classical music when they're born. Something like that, things like that have been shown. Babies can hear outside stimuli to some extent, so they may prefer their father's voice as well to other men's voices, but I'm not very familiar with the research on that. But familiarity does breed liking. We like what we are familiar with. Newborns can learn simple responses from birth. By 3 months, infants can show good memory. In this diagram, with the baby in the crib, there's a mobile, that's what you call that thing, with the strings and the toys. It's mobile, it's like a mobile phone, because it spins and anyway. A study showed that 3 months olds could easily learn to move a mobile by pulling on a ribbon attached to their leg. The infants remembered how to move the mobile when they were placed in the same environment as much as 8 days later. So infants don't have very strong memory, but they don't have no memory. They have a memory. They can remember things, even as soon as they're born. But their memories are not very strong. They're not very good. So when you hear someone describe that they remember being born, you can be a little skeptical, but you cannot believe or disbelieve 100%. Psychologists used to tell us that birth memory is impossible. Maybe they're not saying so much about that now. I mean, I haven't heard anything recently, but usually our earliest memories are somewhere between 3, 4, 5, 6, sometimes even 7 or 8 years old. When people can remember their earliest memory. But there are other people who claim that they can remember less than 1 year of age, and some even as far as their birth. So I don't know. Would anyone care to comment on your earliest memory? Anyone at all?
I think one of my first memories was at like 3 years old. I remember my mom forcing me to brush my teeth.
Very good memory. That's pretty young.
The most I can remember was being like a 3 to 4 year old, being lost at some mall. That's all I can remember.
Yeah, same for me. I think I was around 4, dragging my brother around.
Wow.
I also remember my favorite children's book was ironically about a kid getting lost.
It was about what?
It was about a kid getting lost, like
Oh, wow.
an orange monkey. I remember I read that a lot.
That was a book that you remembered?
Yeah, and I was
Nice.
3.
Anyone else? Can you remember younger than 3?
how would you actually know it is younger than 3? Like, if we're that far back, the concept of time wouldn't be that familiar to you at all. You don't have any time reference other than other people telling you that you were that old.
Indeed. Well, the perception of time, that is an interesting subject. I suppose that we gain the perception of time as soon as we do. As soon as we do, and I don't know when that is. Yeah. My earliest memory was when I was 3 years old. But I only have one memory from that age. I was walking around my house looking for my brother and found out that he was taking a nap. So, yeah. Thank you for sharing your early memories. Infancy continued. We see that babies are born with reflexes. We can discern rhythms of language. At around 6 months, we can discriminate voice intonations that indicate approval or disapproval. So we know what approval and disapproval sound like, even as young as 6 months of age. Very early developmental studies can detect this through their clever experiments. As shown in this picture, a very young infant is participating in a psychological study where the sucking rate, the rate at which the baby sucks on a pacifier, which is a fake nipple, increases or decreases in the speed of the sucking based on whether it is paying attention to the sound or not. Or we could interpret that as liking the sound or not, because we tend to pay attention to what we are interested in. So when the baby hears the mother's voice, the sucking rate increases, I think. Yeah, more vigorous sucking compared to listening to another woman's voice. So through clever designs and contraptions, we can study the development of people even in infancy, and we can study their cognitive development.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So when you have babies participate, or even like toddlers participate in an experiment, like do you have, like, how do you get consent, like from the, like only one parent, or has to be like both parents?
As I understand, one parent is always sufficient.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know. That's an interesting question, because what if the father says no and the mother says yes? Does one vote count more than the other? I think that's just settled between the couple. And even for someone less than, well, it should be less than 20 years old, but we usually say less than 18 years old based on American tradition. That anyone younger than 18 needs to get their parents' permission to participate in experimental research in psychology, even in Thailand. That's just a carryover from American tradition, I suppose. I think. Anyway, I'm going to show a video here. Oh, also, we know solid objects cannot pass through each other. That's a kind of learning that we acquire at some point during infancy. Now, by large yawn, a truck is rolled down a ramp, and these are 3 conditions. It could just pass on normally, it could pass near a box, or it could pass through a box. So the box is, the experimenters assume that children know that solid objects do not move through other solid objects. But if the car moves through the box, then that should be surprising. And if it's surprising, then we should see more looking and more, longer looking times. So by studying infants' looking times, we can see and infer whether they have some grasp of how the normal world works, that solid objects do not pass through one another. If we see the longer looking time, then we infer that infants have learned already objects don't move through objects. Any questions?
How do you think they learn this? Like, how do
Well,
you?
presumably by just watching the world, they should learn that objects never pass through other objects. So it's something that they learn just by observation. Supposed to. Especially when they are interacting with objects on their own, that's when they should really start to learn much faster that that's not true. Because it's one thing to see the world, but it's another thing to interact with it personally. And when infants can personally interact with the world and objects, I think that's when their learning really starts to take off. Infancy to early
So
childhood.
did this,
Yes. Go ahead.
sorry. I just wanted to ask if, so if the researchers observed that um, they were interested in that, like the fact that an object can move through another object.
Yeah, the researchers were interested to see whether or not the infants would be interested.
No, I mean, did the results show that the infants were interested?
Oh yes, thank you. Yes, and earlier than they had supposed. Let's see, I didn't save any notes on that. Well, what I remember is that Piaget reckoned that infants master this ability at the age of something like 3, whereas what they found in the study was that infants as young as 1.5 were already demonstrating surprise at this event, which is to show that infants learn what Piaget supposed they learn younger than he estimated. So Piaget is well known among developmental psychologists because he really provided the definitive and very well known and very well accepted theory of development where infants learn things like object perception, object permanence by a certain level age. And what other researchers have found is that almost in every case where Piaget said infants learn it at this age, it's always earlier than that. We are always seeing evidence of developing abilities and skills younger than we previously supposed. And to do that, we devise clever experiments like this one, and more subtle measurements like looking direction. Thank you, because I didn't really say the results of that study here. All right, so here are some milestones. Preschool-age children, 3 to 5 years old, can count, name colors, tell their name and age, make some decisions on their own, such as choosing an outfit to wear. Preschool children understand basic time concepts and sequencing before and after, predict what will happen next in a story, enjoy use of humor in stories. They can think symbolically. They can enjoy pretend play and inventing elaborate characters and scenarios. One of the most revealing examples is their cognitive growth is their blossoming curiosity. Preschool-age children love to ask why. And between 3 and 5, children come to understand that people have thoughts, feelings, and beliefs about that are different from other people. This is known as theory of mind. So they have their own, they know what that they believe, but they start to learn that other people have different beliefs from themselves. Children can use this skill to tease other people, to persuade their children to purchase a candy bar or understand why a sibling might be angry. When children develop theory of mind, they can recognize that others have false beliefs. Now I'd like to show you this video on theory of mind. Okay, so now you know about theory of mind and how important it is to be able to anticipate and read other people's beliefs and expectations in order to anticipate their behavior, right? So it develops pretty young, only at the age of between 3 and 4, that's when we see it develop, typically. The theory of mind, continued. Other people have minds and can think and have expectations and beliefs, and that these can be different from our own. That is theory of mind. Children with autism may lack theory of mind. Autism is a spectrum, so people on the spectrum may have different levels and degrees of understanding how other people's minds work. In this diagram, we see the little black figure. Let's call her Sally. Sally puts her marble in a basket, and Anne sees it happen. Then Sally goes away, and Anne moves the marble from the basket to the box. And now, where will Sally look for her marble? Is she going to look in the basket where she put it, or in the box where Anne moved it? We should know that Sally will look where she put it. But if we don't have theory of mind, if we're a 3-year-old, we would say, well, she'll look in the box because that's where it is. Any questions about theory of mind? Middle to late childhood. Thought processes become more logical and organized with dealing with concrete information. We start to understand abstract concepts such as past, present, and future. This supports our ability to plan and work toward goals. We can start to process complex ideas like subtraction, addition, cause and effect relationships. And our attention span develops. So as we're very young, we have limited attention spans, but we learn to lengthen that attention span. I don't know if we've learned to, but it just naturally happens as we move into adulthood. Then we get into adolescence, where we see that we move beyond concrete thinking to the level of abstract thinking. We have the ability to consider multiple points of view and hypothetical situations, ideas and opinions. We can talk about politics, religion, and justice. These are all abstract concepts. And we can form new ideas and question authority or challenge established societal norms. We develop our theory of mind further to include cognitive empathy, where we can take perspectives and feel concern for other people. This begins to rise in girls at around age 13, but in boys it starts to develop around 15. Teens who report having supportive fathers, this is based on some research, with whom they can discuss their worries and concerns, are found to be better able to take the perspectives of others. And then I put in gray font, only fathers? What do you think? I don't think it's just fathers. I think that the more that teens can discuss their feelings and their worries with anyone at all, the more that they should be able to develop better perspective of other people's feelings. This is just a developmental task that we can learn through exposure and experience, learn it from others. But when you see research that says supportive fathers support the development of this ability, you know that this is just research that happened to find in their sample of studying, happened to find this result. And of course, supportive fathers would support that. But it's not limited to supportive fathers. Just as much or more important would be supportive mothers. So we do just need to beware of our of understanding research too literally. That was the point that I wanted to make here on this slide. Anything else?
Can it begin to rise earlier?
Yes, yes. So when it says around 13 years of age or 15, that is average. That means that some people are going to develop it at much younger ages. Some will develop it at 9 years old, some maybe 6 years old. Some not until they're adults. So this is the average. Psychology, often, especially in developmental psychology, we learn about the average, not about individual people's abilities. Thank you, that's a really good point. Now I make a special point about language development because language seems to be such a valuable and important skill to humans. So we can take extra emphasis, attention toward this. One well-researched aspect of cognitive development is language development. Before birth, babies begin to learn language and communication skills. Children communicate information through gesturing long before they can speak. Actually, we learn our first gestures before we learn our first words, usually. But if you're not learning, or you don't know sign language, or you're not trying to teach your child sign language, you wouldn't see this. Gestures develop earlier because it seems that we are better at using our hands than at using our tongues and throats and lips all together. It seems that speaking is a more complex and more difficult task that develops later than sign language or gesturing. So gestures by non-signing parents might include come here, or no, or I don't know, shaking the head. These are gestures, and children can speak with these gestures earlier than they can speak with their words, with their mouths. At birth, children begin to coo. Cooing is one-syllable sounds like ba, ga, or even the word coo itself. Interestingly, babies replicate sounds from their own language. A baby whose parents speak French will coo in French in a different tone than babies who speak Spanish, parents speak Spanish or Urdu. After cooing comes babbling. Babbling is repeating a syllable such as mama, dada, baba. Any questions or comments on this slide? Okay.
Oh,
Yeah. Anything? No, okay. Language development. So there's something called a vocabulary spurt, but this only happens in some learners. The gradual learners don't seem to show a vocabulary spurt, but those who are slower in language development initially may show a spurt in their language development at around 18 months of age. This is based on research. So if we look at just one average for all infants, there appears to be some sign of a language spurt, but then it doesn't appear in some infants, only in some others. So only by more advanced statistics can we separate learners from each other and notice that there are basically two trends that that then join at around 19 or 20 months. Theories of language development. What accounts for such dramatic language learning by children? So there's, first I should mention that, as you can see from this graph, children, although they are young, they learn words pretty rapidly. So they're learning their language pretty rapidly. I think we can all agree that children's language development is rather remarkable. So how can we account for their remarkable pace of language learning? The behaviorist perspective, first advanced by B.F. Skinner, who studied pigeons and rats and advanced the behavioral school of thought following Watson. He thought that we learn language in response to reinforcement or feedback, such as through parental approval or through being understood. So basically he framed language learning in terms of rewards and punishments. Reinforcements are rewards, and feedback is reward, and parental approval is reward. So as children make random sounds and their parents pay attention to them more when they accidentally speak a correct word, that's how behaviorists believed past tense that children could learn language. However, Noam Chomsky was a linguist who criticized Skinner's theory and said, this is a ridiculous theory. It would result in language learning far too slowly for children to master their language. we must be born with an innate ability, which he called a language acquisition device. This is simply some theoretical device that must exist in our brains innately, which means that we're born with it. Who's correct? After the nature and nurture debate raged for a few decades, researchers now believe that both are correct, that it is a nature and nurture negotiation and cooperation to enable children to acquire language. This is a partly inborn ability and partly a learned ability through our interaction with our linguistic environment.
Mr. Jason,
Yes.
do you think the reason why it took so long for them to understand that it's both nature and nurture is that they put it on two sides rather than thinking of it as the same as helping each other out, like two conflicting?
I think you hit the nail on the head there. It's because people then were so strongly associated with one school of thought or the other school of thought. They were too strongly tied to their favored beliefs that they would not entertain the other side's camp. They would not try to negotiate between them and bring them together. So as long as you're trying to argue that my side's right, no, my side is right, then the debate continues for months, years, or decades. But why didn't the researchers say maybe both of them are right? I think that the reason they didn't want to negotiate and join the two perspectives together was because they wanted to keep the debate going. They wanted to keep the argument going because the argument itself is stimulating. It's kind of stimulating to say, no, you must be wrong, and point out all of the reasons why the other side must be wrong. And point to the reasons why my side must be right. And more than just for stimulation and for debate, I think that there is actually some function to arguing back and forth, because this debate itself helps both sides to uncover their greatest argumental strengths and uncover the other side's greatest argument weaknesses. So by picking on one another's strengths and weaknesses, I think the debate or the argument accelerated the development of eventual understanding that it is both. It always has been both. Just thinking about it right now. Thank you for that question.
You're welcome.
Emerging adulthood starts from around 18 or maybe 20. You can start the age range a bit loosely because if you think about it, not everyone develops at the same pace. Especially the older you get, there's more variety in when you start on the next stage, if there even is discrete stages. So we might call this 18 to 25 or to 23 or whatever you like. So emerging adulthood is when identity exploration is focused on work and love. When does a person become an adult? And I ask you to type in the chat box, when does a person become an adult? All right. We have said 20, and sometimes by law 18. I think this is a good answer, when you're mentally ready to be one. I agree. When you're mentally mature and capable of the duties of adulthood. That's a really good answer, and I think that that's when your mindset is mature, right? Good answers. I've written some notes here to read. In the United States, you are legally considered an adult when you're 18 years old, but other definitions of adulthood vary. In sociology, for example, a person may be considered an adult when she is self-supporting, chooses a career, gets married, or starts a family. The ages at which we achieve these milestones vary from person to person as well as from culture to culture. For example, in the African country of Malawi, 15-year-old Njemali was married at 14 years old, and she had her first child at 15. In her culture, she is considered an adult. Would you consider yourself an adult at the age of 15?
No.
Me neither. Children in Malawi take on adult responsibilities such as marriage and work, carrying water, tending to babies, working in the field. They do this as early as 10 years of age. So in some ways, they're already adults at the age of 10. In stark contrast, independence in Western cultures is taken longer and longer, effectively delaying the onset of adulthood. So while America defines adulthood at 18, but they still don't permit smoking until the age of 21, or no, drinking at the age of 21. And that is an illustration of taking the age of adulthood back further and further. So we are recognizing that even though earlier generations may have thought that 18 is an adult, and yet we don't feel like 18 is really so completely an adult. So we made this rule about drinking age at 21 in America. Different countries have different drinking ages. It's 20 in Thailand, I believe. And I don't know about smoking. I think, I don't know what the rule is in America. What is the rule about smoking in Thailand? How old do you have to be?
Maybe like 20 or 18. I'm not sure about that.
Yeah.
I heard that there are restrictions on buying it, but there isn't a set rule about smoking in general. I might have heard wrong.
No, that makes sense. Buying is the critical thing because that's where that's where the law can enforce it. And I think it's 18 for smoking in America. And yeah. Or another answer is, no. Never mind. All right, so why is it taking 20 years to grow up? It seems that emerging adulthood is a product of both Western culture and our current times. People in developed countries are living longer, allowing the freedom to take an extra decade to start a career and family. Changes in the workforce also play a role. For example, 50 years ago, young adults with a high school diploma could immediately enter the workforce and climb the corporate ladder. Whereas now, that's no longer the case. A bachelor's degree and even a graduate degree are starting to be required more and more often, even for entry-level jobs. In addition, many students are taking longer such as 5 or 6 years to complete college. And as a result of working and going to school at the same time, after graduation, many young adults return to the family home because they have difficulty finding a job, which again seems to delay adulthood. Changing cultural expectations may be the most important reason for the delay in entering adult roles. And I would add, economic forces are a big component to the delay of economic roles, potentially. Young people are spending more time exploring their options, so they are delaying marriage and work as they change majors and jobs multiple times, putting them on a much later timetable than their parents. Whereas your parents may have married on average at around 23 years of age or something, I'm just guessing and estimating. You might delay until around 27 years of age, and again, I'm estimating. Whereas previous, your grandparents may have married at the age of 18 or younger, your great-grandparents younger. So times are changing, life expectancy, and the demands of society on the level of training that is required to enter into the technological workforce now means that more schooling and older age for entering into adult working roles. And we see that in later ages of marriage and family and starting careers. Adulthood begins around 20, as we've said, and has 3 distinct phases. There's early, middle, and late. And I just realized we might like to have a break. So how about we have a 10-minute break?
Okay.
All right, so I'll start back in 10 minutes at 2:18. Okay. So adulthood begins around 20 years of age and has 3 distinct stages: early, middle, and late. Each stage brings its own set of rewards and challenges. Because we spend so many years of our lives in adulthood, we can identify that there are numerous cognitive changes. The research suggests that our cognitive development throughout adulthood may be just as active or more active than other stages of development. Of course, we do spend more years of our lives in the adult stage just by the definition of which ages correspond to which stages. I'd like to click on this little video here to show. That came to my mind just now is use it or lose it. As adults reach retirement age and no longer need to use some skills that they previously needed for their careers, they might come to lose their skills, their cognitive skills, unless they continue to use them. Also, the video told us that we can hold on to our good cognitive health, not just by using those mental skills, but also by eating well, exercising, and socializing. Socializing is kind of surprising. Why does that have anything to do with cognitive health? But there is a lot social life stimulates much of the brain and includes all kinds of cognitive skills involved in communicating and sharing thoughts and theory of mind and all of that. So I think the four skills to remain cognitively strong in old age, as I see them, are use your brain, exercise, good health, and social life.
Excuse me, Professor. I have
Yes.
a question. If the like classical music also like help with the infant cognitive improvement, that is work as well with the adulthood.
I think so, yes. Music, more than just listening, is playing it, being involved in it. I think absolutely. I haven't seen exact research on this, but I'm certain that it does. Music is very stimulating to the brain. In general, the thing that keeps the brain healthy is stimulation. The reason that exercise and eating right and socializing are good for the brain is that they keep the brain stimulated, just like cognitive activity. Playing music, very much. Also playing games. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cognitive abilities remain stable throughout early and middle adulthood. Uh, they are unlike physical abilities, which peak at around the mid-20s, followed by a slow decline. So you have yet to peak in your physical abilities. That peaks around the mid-20s, apparently. But you have many decades to go with your cognitive abilities. Our crystallized intelligence, which is information, skills, strategies, these tend to hold steady or improve as we age. For example, adults show relatively stable scores on intelligence tests through their mid-30s into their mid-50s, I would say early 60s. However, in late adulthood, there is usually a decline in fluid intelligence. I haven't yet explained what crystallized intelligence is and how that's different from fluid intelligence.
Is it like the accumulation of all your knowledge?
When we use the word knowledge, that's crystallized. But when we talk about the ability to attain knowledge, that ability is fluid. So fluid is what supports crystallized intelligence. So fluid would be the ability to reason, the ability to remember, the ability to process information. So these things are fluid intelligence. These things usually decline in late adulthood, even while crystallized intelligence seems to remain unaffected. Now, how can we delay the onset of cognitive decline? As the video mentioned, those who engage in physically and mentally stimulating activities experience less cognitive decline. I believe that's less fluid intelligence decline. Fluid, again, is the raw ability, the ability to learn, the ability to remember, and to reason. These things are like the muscles of the brain. Whereas crystallized intelligence is like what you have done with the muscles, the skills that you have developed with those muscles. Does that make sense? So for example, if you're really good at math, well, that shows two things. That shows that you have some kind of raw natural ability, that's fluid intelligence. And then you have all of the facts and the understanding which you've gained from textbooks and teachers and all of that. That's crystallized intelligence. So you need fluid intelligence to get that crystallized intelligence, but the crystallized is the product, and the fluid intelligence is what you used to create that product or to make it, to get it. Now, both kinds of intelligence do decline, but fluid intelligence starts the decline earlier, and we don't really notice the crystallized intelligence diminishing until people get really in severe cognitive decline. Risk and growth. This is my last lecture slide, I think. Risk is the birthplace of innovation and is essential to growth. I was inspired to put this slide in here from reading the book on which my first lecture was based, on the mindsets for growth. Here's a quote from that book. By engaging in risky play, children are effectively subjecting themselves to a form of exposure therapy in which they force themselves to do things they're afraid of in order to overcome their fear. But if they never go through that process, the fear can turn into a phobia, because a fear that is left unchecked just remains. It remains and it grows. Paradoxically, our fear of children being harmed may result in more fearful children and increase their level of psychopathology. So we should not be afraid of taking risks, because risk is the birthplace of innovation and growth. And another quote, allowing children space to explore safely in both free play and learning helps children to learn that risk is the birthplace of potential, or helps us learn that. This is true for adults too. Here are my references. And now we move on to the lab component of the class. I'd like us to have a group discussion, or groups. So I'll divide you into breakout rooms. And I want each group to mark down the group members' nicknames and answer these questions and submit one set of answers to my line with all these answers written down. So take a picture and upload to my line. All right.
Wait, you want your like privately or just on a group chat?
Privately. I'm gonna send you.
Okay. Do we have to put like the candidate name, like not the candidate name, the person's name and their like student ID?
Yes.
As well.
I don't really need the student ID. All I need is the nickname.
Oh, all right. Okay, okay.
Yeah. And the answers to these questions. So I want everyone in the group to contribute their thoughts and anything else you want to talk about in your groups is fine. We're gonna break out for about 10 minutes. Okay? All right, I'm sending you to your rooms now. Okay, so this is the next. The next part is a continuation of our lab assignment. Now, actually, this is presenting to you your next project. And I have received some line messages already from students who are submitting their group answers to the previous question, to the podcast discussion. So thank you for sending that when you get a chance. Now, this is the developmental assignment. You are to interview 5 elders. And this is the project that's due on October 12th. So you have quite a long time to do this, but there's no real reason to delay. You just do it whenever you can do it.
Professor, your screen isn't shared.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for, yes. Great, thank you. Can you see it now?
Yes.
All right. So, you're going to work in groups of 5. You're going to interview 5 elders. Now, you could, because there's a requirement for 5 elders, I did that on purpose to make sure or encourage you to interview 1 each, and then put your interviews together in one project paper. So the rule is they have to be over the age of 60. I discourage you from physically interacting with elders, though, because of COVID. So please seek alternatives like calling, emailing, text, FaceTime, chat. These are much preferred over physical visits. I will grant a 5% assignment bonus, which corresponds to 0.25% of your final grade for those who conduct non-physical meetings. So if you can do all 5 meetings non-physically, you get bumped up by 0.25%, by 5% on that project. This assignment, the idea from this assignment came from a friend of mine, Ms. Battle. This gets you to capitalize on one of society's most valuable and least realized sources of wisdom, our elderly. Create 5 questions. Any 5 questions, it's up to you. Now the assignment is called developmental assignment. So I would hope and appreciate if you choose developmental questions. Questions about growing up and maybe questions about being old. So then you take your 5 questions that you come up with as a group and you ask the same 5 questions to every single interviewee. So you treat these interviews as a chance to learn something interesting and unique about that stage of life, as well as about your own life, past, present, and future, by comparison. Group responses by questions, please. I only thought about this last night. So don't have like interview 1, all 5 questions, all 5 answers. Instead, if you could please group all of the answers by the question. So question 1, and then 1, 2, 3, 4 interviews, 5 interview answers for that one question. That would make a much more meaningful organization for addressing these questions. And also it makes it easier to see what they have in common and to comment on the commonalities between the interviewees. Direct quotes can be helpful, but not necessary. Note any interesting things that you learned. Identify elements in common between 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 interviewees, and conclude with what you learned from this assignment. And again, be especially cautious and careful with in-person interviewing with elders because they are susceptible, they're particularly susceptible to COVID. That's true of the elderly, it's true of the sick, so be careful. And as I mentioned, prefer not in person. If approaching a person, wear your mask at all times, keep a social distance, sanitize your hands before you enter their homes. If an outbreak or second wave occurs, this assignment may be replaced or canceled, but I think we're fine as long as we keep to non-physical interactions. Any questions about this assignment? I know that one big question you will have is who is in your group?
Professor, do we have to document the interview?
Yes. No. What do you mean by document?
Like, do we have to record a video or record their voice during the interview?
No, you don't have to get any kind of recording. But if it helps you to record, you can do so with their permission.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Professor,
Yeah.
sorry.
Yes.
Can we choose our own group?
No.
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 Oh, okay.
So I'm going to assign you to groups today, and I want you to work with each other, come up with a plan. Before I get to that, I wrote something to read to you. Always respect your father and mother. By the way, if your father or mother is older than 60, you could interview them. I don't know what ages your parents are. At your age, probably not 60, but who knows, it's possible. So you can interview your own parents or your grandparents, as long as whoever it is, they're over 60. But I wanted to say a few words here. Always respect your father and mother, and I should add to that, your grandparents. Always give them the respect and trust in their wisdom and their age. Give them the respect of age, because with age comes wisdom. You have your Insight Journal assignment. I don't know if you've started on your Insight Journal assignment, but you should basically, anytime you come up with some valuable insight, add it to your journal. That's going to be due toward the end. But speaking of insights, insight builds upon itself and grows, and nothing is wiser than the aged, the elders. Believe in your parents and respect age. Gain insight from their life and their wisdom and the years that have passed by their eyes. They have seen a lot. Be willing to learn from them. Humble yourself in front of them. They are your teachers. And so are children. And I added that little note at the end, so are children, because it's not only the elderly that we can learn from, we can also learn from children who have yet to learn all of our knowledge, and also all of the lies that become propagated through society because it's socially accepted to believe in certain things. So children can be your teachers as well. Therefore, you may choose to interview one child as a substitute for one elderly person at your discretion, using the same interview questions but phrased in a way that could relate to a child so that a child could answer them. If your questions are not answerable by a child, you can adapt the questions to questions that a child could answer. So that's your option. If you want, you can substitute one elder for a child, any age, or you can just interview all elders. The definition of child would be before, let's say, age 12 and younger. Any questions so far about this project? Okay, I'm going to assign you into groups right now.
อาจารย์คะ
Yes.
If we conduct a physical interview with parents, do we still get a 5% assignment bonus?
Yes. If the 60-year-old is living in your house, then you can count them as though they were interviewed online.
So we need to write in the report that we interviewed them online.
Yes. Online, or they were living in your house.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. That's a good adjustment to my bonus requirement. That's good.
So interviewing in person for the person who live in the same house as us is also a 5% bonus, right?
Yes.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. So I guess you would want to document which ones you interviewed in person, which ones you interviewed online, and hopefully all of your interviews are online with the exception of people in your house, which are permitted for the 5% bonus. You can still get the 5% bonus. All right. All right, so I'm going to break you up into new groups, and this is always random assignment, so I'm just gonna randomly reassign you into groups now, and this is the, oh, let me check if there's anything else I wanna say before I do that. Okay, so, all right, so yes, we have a lab assignment, and I do want you to, hold on. Okay, there's another lab assignment besides the discussion that you already had. And I'm going to give you the next lab assignment, but first I want you to meet in your developmental assignment groups, which I'm going to create now. So I want you to meet in your group and exchange information so that you can meet outside of class to continue working on the developmental assignment. That means you want to exchange your phone number or your email or your line contact information or create a line group, something like that. So I'm going to break you up into new breakout rooms for 10 minutes to make sure that you have plenty of time to exchange information and get all on the same page about who's going to interview who and your contact information. And maybe you want to start creating a shared document, like a Google document, which would require your email addresses, or maybe you want to do it online and that would require your phone number or line contact information. So please exchange information now. And I'm sending you to your group of 5. A few rooms will have a group of 6, but most of them will have 5. Okay, so I'm sending you now. Any questions before I do?
Wait, so after this, then do we just like separate and finish the class because it's already done, right?
No, you're gonna come back to the classroom after this, after 10 minutes. I'll bring you back because we have a lab assignment to do, another lab. I'm going to our lab activity. right, Cognitive Development Lab, Mirror Tracing, Development of Motor Control. So in this lab, we're going to learn how difficult mirror tracing is and how difficult it is to control our motor movements, our fine motor movements, while trying to monitor those fine motor movements through our visual tracking through a mirror rather than directly looking at what we're doing. So here's the lab activity link, and I was thinking it would be in which you're going to try drawing or tracing the entire circle with your dominant and non-dominant hands, counting the time that it takes you and the errors, and then do it again. Both hands, counting time and errors, so we can see if you got any better by practicing. Mirror drawing is a skill that most people have never practiced and don't have. But by practice, we quickly develop facility with new things. So in this cognitive development laboratory, you're going to cognitively develop your mirror drawing ability. At least that's what we're going to try to do and illustrate in this lab. You may want to screenshot this or download this to help you write up, because you're going to turn this in. This is what, but every time you hit reset, it starts you back to regular mode, and then as soon as you click again, you're in mirror mode, and then when you click a third time, you get a side-by-side comparison. Okay, I actually didn't really figure that out until now. Thank you. All right, so here was my first time. There's my second time. I couldn't even do it because I was in a hurry. So you end the first one by clicking, the second time by clicking, and then you get your two side-by-side scores. So then you can write that down on your assignment sheet. But it doesn't give you the error count. You have to count that on your own visually. Okay?
Wait, so how do we count the error?
You count by every time you exit from the line, from the circle. Whether you exit inside the circle or exit outside the circle, every time you exit, that's counted as one error.
Okay, thank you.
Do you have to screenshot our result?
No, you don't.